Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for attending today's webinar on navigating funeral and cemetery services. My name is Sharon Rich. I'm the Senior Trust Advisor at Aged Trust, where we manage pooled trust and special needs trust for seniors and persons with disabilities who need to qualify for Medicaid and have too much money. So all of our clients have some sort of disability and need Medicaid, and we manage the special needs trust for them. Welcome today. I do see a lot of guardians on the call, and we do have continuing ed credits approved for the professional guardians and for attorneys. You will all receive an email from Kate at trustagent.org within the next week with your certificate of attendance, and a copy of the presentation will be provided also, and a link to the recorded presentation. So we do have a large audience today. We ask that you put your questions into chat, and we'll leave plenty of time at the end to answer them for you. I am very pleased to introduce our speaker today, T. Rogers. T is a dedicated pre-planning death care professional with Dignity Memorial serving Central Florida. Her expertise in funeral, cremation, and cemetery planning. T guides individuals and families through critical decisions with care and compassion. Her areas of specialization include veterans, burial benefits, and Medicaid strategies for final arrangements and custom monument design. T is also the author of Identifying Affirming Death Care Directives, a resource designed to honor individual identity in end-of-life planning. In addition to her professional contributions, T serves on the board of the Pride Chamber Orlando, where she actively advocates for diversity and inclusivity in death care services. Her commitment to empowering clients and knowledge and personalized solutions makes her a respected figure in the field of pre-planning death care. I've known T for over a year now, and she is just awesome to work with. And we'll put T's contact information into the chat for you. Please help me welcome T. Rogers. Take it away, T.
Well, hello, Sharon, and hello, everyone. I want to thank you all so much for being here. I know that this is a difficult topic, and I want to be respectful of that. Very grateful for your time and investing this time today. And I'm looking forward to having a great conversation with you. So I want to just tell you that I introduce myself as a time travel agent. When I say that, I mean, if we can imagine our family, our loved ones, who at some point are going to be sitting in a room with a funeral director, and they're going to be in grief, they're going to be in chaos, and they're going to have to make heavy emotional and financial decisions. We can reach forward to that moment and pull those decisions back in time to today and make those decisions on their behalf so that when they face that moment, we have lessened that burden for them. I want to ask as we go through this discussion that we all keep in mind that at the other end of these decisions and these details that we're going to talk about, there are real grieving people and families that we're talking about and that we're looking to protect. So first of all, I just want to say we're going to do this in 3 parts. We're going to talk a little bit about all of the different elements, so the not so basic basics, decisions that need to be made, options that are available, and then we're going to talk about what people need to know when they're thinking about funeral planning. So what they need to know when they're talking with death care providers, funeral homes, direct cremation providers, cemeteries, all of that. And then we're going to leave some solid time at the end for questions. So please do leave questions in the chat, and we'll come back to those when we get to the end. So first, we'll talk a little bit about all of the decisions that need to be made at the time of a loss. So if all decisions were made just on practicality, we would all drive the same car, same color, same options. But we're individuals with preferences. And so all of these decisions can get a little bit messy. And we're going to peek behind that curtain together today. I want to talk about when pre-planning happens. So there are 3 times that you can sit with a funeral professional and make decisions. The first and the ideal is pre-need, and that is long before we ever expect that anything is going to happen. And then there is crisis planning, and that can be near need. Sometimes there is a window after a diagnosis or in hospice when we can get together with the family and help to make those decisions before a loss occurs. Anything that happens before a loss occurs, a pre-planner is going to help with that. And then the third time is at need, which is when you would be meeting with a funeral director and making all of those decisions at the time of loss. So the foundational decision, the basic thing that we need to think about before we can even get started is whether we're going to choose casketed burial or cremation. And it's not as easy as it might seem. There are a lot of different things that feed into this decision. It might be cultural or religious or family traditions. I can tell you that I've had people who have chosen cremation because they are claustrophobic and they just can't imagine themselves being in a casket, so they want to avoid that. I've also had people who have chosen burial even though they would prefer cremation because everyone in their family has always done casketed burial, and so they don't want to be the one to break that tradition. When we talk about types of services, gosh, these terms for end-of-life services can be very fuzzy. Many people use them interchangeably. For other people, there are specific definitions for each of these terms. So I'm going to talk about them a little bit. Viewing, visitation, calling hours, that is generally something where there's no service. It might be for immediate family and close friends only, or it might be opened up to the public, or there might be both of those elements. Viewing often might refer to having the casket open, and visitation might refer to having the casket closed. But again, that is an option in all of those, however those terms are used. For religious service and mass, I think that's fairly self-explanatory. For funeral, celebration of life, and memorial, generally, some people will use the term funeral for any end-of-life service, but it may refer to something that is a little bit more somber or more formal. It may or may not be religious. And then a celebration of life might be more personalized, more focused on the individual's life, the contributions that they made to the world and the impact they had on the people that are there at the service. And then a memorial might be somber and formal, or it might be celebratory, but it's often referred to as a service when the body isn't present. Some people use the term memorial when they're talking about a service with the urn present. Other people only mean that the casket isn't present. But again, there's no law on how these terms are used. And so we just want to respect what the family is looking for and what they mean when they use these terms. For cremation, all of those options are available. So you can certainly have the viewing, visitation, religious services, funeral or celebration of life, any of that with the casket present. And with cremation, you also have the option of doing, maybe just a simple viewing before the cremation occurs. And also the family can choose to be present at the crematory if they would like when the cremation happens. And of course, some people choose no services at all. They might choose a direct burial or a direct cremation. Whenever you're working on final arrangements, there are going to be two contracts that you do. Even if you're doing your plans with the same planner, there's always going to be the two contracts. So on the one side, there's going to be the funeral contract that will have professional service fees, transportation. That'll be things like picking you up and taking you into care, and any other transportation that might be needed, like transportation to the crematory or transportation to the airport if we're doing burial in another state or another country, or transportation, the hearse being used for the day for the services, if we're transporting a casket. Crematory fee, if that's going to be applicable for the plan, a casket and or an urn, and any services that the family wants to have. So all of those things are going to be on the funeral side. And then on the cemetery side of the contract, there are generally 4 items. So there's a professional fee for the cemetery as well. And then the rights to be in the space. So when you purchase a space, you will get a deed, but it's not the same as owning property. You're owning the right to be in that space. And then if it's appropriate for the space that you're purchasing, you would have a vault. And then we would also need to think about memorialization, right? How is that space going to be marked, and show that permanent place that the person was here on this earth? I think that is a really important point for pre-planning, because so many times families don't think about that piece and they say that's something that we can do after. But when people are designing a marker that's going to forever memorialize their loved ones, it can be very difficult for them to think about what words are we going to place there, what images are we going to place there. So doing that in advance is really an important part of guiding your family through what you want for final arrangements. All right, so there are a lot of unique options in death care. I'm not going to go into all of these, but you can see that there are a lot of different options that people may want to select. And we can talk more about some of these in the discussion portion if you'd like. But just know that there are a lot more options than what might be presented to you when you talk to a death care professional, whether that's a pre-planner or a funeral director, because they may not know about the options that are out there. And they also may not give options that are not offered through the company that you've chosen to entrust with your care. So I'm just going to pick on one of these to go over a little bit. I'll just pick on natural burial versus green burial. So some of you may know the difference between natural burial and green burial. Natural burial, like in a burial for Jewish or Muslim or Wiccan traditions, is one where there's going to be no embalming. There's going to be a natural casket. It might be wood or some other natural material. If there's a vault for burial, it might be bottomless or percolated, meaning that there are holes punched into it so that they can maintain contact with the earth. And that can be done in almost any cemetery, so it's not done in a dedicated cemetery. There are cases, for example, for veterans, if we want to do a natural burial for a veteran, then we need to contact that cemetery and make sure that they can accommodate the custom vaults if that's something that's important to the family. Green burial is a dedicated ground. It is certified by the Green Burial Council. There are no traditional burials in that cemetery. So there's no chemicals, only natural biodegradable materials. Even the clothing worn by the decedents is going to be biodegradable. Now, I talk to a lot of death care professionals because that's what I do and that's the arena I'm in. And I've heard someone talk about planning planning for someone and said that they could do a green burial in their cemetery. But they only thought that because they could do burial without embalming, but they didn't understand the difference between the two. So if green burial is something that's important to you, it's left to you to either find a planner who understands what green burial means or to educate yourself and make that investment so that you know the difference and you know what to ask for. It is really left to the consumer to research and know what it is that they want for themselves and find a provider and a professional who can honor those requests. I will touch on one other of these options. So the company that I work for is national. We have about 2,000 locations around the country. And one of those locations is Neptune Memorial Reef, which is the world's only marine biologist curated under ocean cremation mausoleum. It is located off the coast of Key Biscayne, and it covers 16 acres of ground. And we're just revitalizing that whole area into a thriving reef through this project. So there are lots of really neat things out there that you can research and find and honor you or your loved one in a really unique and wonderful way. I do want to talk about veterans burial benefits. I know I see all the time there are multiple studies that say that 60% of veterans don't know what their veterans burial benefits actually cover. I would take that with a grain of salt because I have not been able to find any of those studies. I don't know where they have come from, but I do know that of the veterans that I have interacted with, a majority of them do not know what their burial benefits do and do not cover. So think back to the slide where we had the two contracts. For veterans who choose the national cemetery, if they qualify, the cemetery side is covered for them, but the funeral side is left to the family. So that cemetery benefit, that is for cremation or casketed burial, and some of them for cremation will have both in-ground and above-ground options. And spouses can choose mixed disposition. So if one spouse wants casketed burial and the other wants cremation, they can still be buried together. It is important that the family asks the funeral provider that they've chosen what parts of the process that the funeral home will coordinate on behalf of the family. I will share a quick story. I had a hospice call once for a family. Dad was a veteran and he was in hospice, and the family wanted me to come out and help with some final arrangements and getting those in place. And when I got there, the family was just exasperated because they told me they'd been spending hours and hours and hours on research trying to figure out what the veterans burial benefits would cover for him and what they needed to do. They were very grateful to find out, that we were going to be able to help them with all of that. But I was very sad that they lost that time that they could have spent with him in doing that research. So it's really important that we educate veteran families and make sure they know to look into their veterans burial benefits so that in a time of crisis, they're not left wondering and under stress trying to figure out what they need to do. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. Because I really feel that no one should face discrimination or any other identity challenges when they're planning for their own death or when they're facing the loss of a loved one. But unfortunately, it does happen. Imagine being turned away from a funeral home or having your religious, secular, or spiritual identity disrespected at one of your most vulnerable times. And I'm not going to go into this much here. I could do a whole presentation just on this. But I do want you to remember that just because someone says, I'll take anyone's money, or we serve everyone, that doesn't mean that they have any clue about what that person or their identity might need or how to respect that identity. So when you plan in advance, when you pre-plan, one of the advantages is you create space for finding affirming identity educated providers and advisors that you trust. So I want us all to just think back on our family members that we pictured in the beginning, sitting with a funeral director, having to make final arrangements in this time of grief, having to make heavy financial, emotional, logistical decisions. And the one thing that we can do in that moment to wrap our arms around them and tell them that we love them one more time is to have that plan in place, to be able to lessen that burden from them. We cannot take away their grief. We can't make that grief any less, but we can take a rock out of the backpack of burden that they're going to be carrying and make that load just a little bit lighter. I'll share that one of my first early calls in this job, I had the honor of responding to a hospital where a young couple was taking their young child off of life support. And it was a horrible, horrible day for them. They didn't know anything about death care. They didn't know anything about what was going to happen. And they were terrified of what would happen to her body. Where was she going to go? Who was going to be taking care of her? It was very, very stressful. People ask me all the time, when is the best time to plan, right? How old should I be when I make a plan for final arrangements? And we always think we have more time, but the reality is we don't know. We don't know when. We don't know when we're going to need a plan like this. Planning is, yes, about protecting our loved ones when something happens to us, but it's also about being educated so that no matter when in our lives or who in our lives, when we face a loss, we have that armor of education and we know what to do and we have that knowledge to guide us. If I could just get everyone to plan in their 20s, almost no one would ever walk into our funeral home not knowing what to do. And I do see the difference every day. Families who walk into the funeral home when there's a plan in place, and families who walk into the funeral home when there's not a plan in place. There is a huge difference. It's just never going to be less expensive than today. So why not lock in the prices? And it is never going to be easier than today to have the conversation. So have it before there's a crisis. So, as we're serving people out in the community, and I know this is intended to be focused on that, we are educating them about making these decisions while they have a clear head to do so and are able to make those decisions before there's a crisis, before they're in this swirl of chaos, and they can make more rational, budgeted, meaningful decisions for themselves and their families. So that was the first section on all of the decisions and different things that we need to think about. Now I want to shift our focus a little bit, right? You are going to do business with the death care industry. I am going to do business with the death care industry. We all are. We will all face the loss of someone that we love. And one day, the people that we love will face the loss of us. And further, we each serve vulnerable older adults and disabled individuals And we have a responsibility to give them good guidance about funeral planning and make sure that they know how to make good decisions for themselves. So the more we know, the better. In Florida, the funeral and cemetery industry is regulated by the Department of Financial Services. There is a 10-member board, the Board of Funeral, Cemetery, and the Board of Funeral, Cemetery, and Consumer Services. And there are also statutes governing the practice and licensure of funeral directing, transit permitting, cemetery operations, pre-arrangements, and much more. Nationally, there's the Federal Trade Commission's funeral rule, which the funeral rule of 1984, which was amended in the 90s. And that's what I'm going to start with and talk a little bit about that, because that's where I think the kind of consumer rights start. So I have up here some information on price lists, but I just want to talk a little bit about some different things that this rule allows for families. So first of all, the client will have a copy of the relevant price list before the salesperson, whether that's pre-need or at need, starts talking about options. Consumers have the right to get prices over the phone. So if they call in, then we do need to give them those prices. If you call in and you get someone who doesn't know anything about the prices, they might need to get someone else for you, but you do have the right to get those prices over the phone. Consumers can choose any arrangements that they want. So you'll see on here that there's a package price list listed. Most funeral homes are going to offer packages of items. Those are, you know, if you do a service, there are certain things that families normally and traditionally get as part of that service. So when they purchase all of those things, there's a discount for doing that. But families do not have to choose to use a package, and they do not have to select or purchase anything that they do not want to select or purchase. Another thing is we must disclose that embalming is not always required by law. There may be instances where embalming is going to be required, but in some cases it is not. Caskets are not required for cremation. So an alternative container must be available. We do have to have the person in something while they're in our care to protect them, but it doesn't have to be a full casket. We have alternative containers available for that. And you see the FTC rule on the screen lists 3 price lists that are required to be provided. I have, I think, 5 price lists listed here. Our general price list, the casket price list, and the outer burial container price list. The outer burial is the vault that the casket goes in the ground, and that may actually be part of the casket price list. I also have a list here of things that consumers should ask. So this is, you know, when we get to the end and I talk about what you should know before you sign a contract, these are the questions that I want people to think about and just have an idea of what these answers are, so that when they get home from planning and they're looking at their plan, they don't have these questions coming up. And then I have over here as well for insurance-backed plans. So when a funeral home offers pre-need to a family, they are required to protect the client's investment by backing that with a third party. That may be with an insurance company, and there may or may not be a cost of insurance associated with that plan, depending on how the payments are set up. So that's something that the client should clearly understand. When I work with clients, I do a payment worksheet. This is just a little bit of what's on it, but it's a 2-sided paper. One side has those questions to make sure that the client understands what they need to know. And the other side is making sure they know exactly how much they paid for the contract, the amount that they gave on the down payment, if there's an early payoff option that has a forgiveness for interest or cost of insurance. Make sure they know what their contract numbers are and policy numbers are. And then one of the things I always tell families is that they should come in for a file review at least every 5 years. I've seen families come in who planned 10, 20, 50 years or more ago and had not ever come back in and talked to that provider again since that plan was made. So just come in, have a cup of coffee every 5 years, make sure that your paperwork is in order, that we have everything up to date in our paperwork. I think one of the questions on here is who has access to review and update my plans if I'm incapacitated. So just making sure that you know who has access to your plans. It may change over time, and make sure that we have that information updated in our system. For things that again, I'm not going to go over all of these, just maybe touch on one or two. Like the merchandise you purchase may not be available at the time of your loss. So if you're purchasing a plan today, but you're not going to use that plan until much later, then it's like buying a car many years before you're going to pick it up, right? There's going to be other models and options and colors. So one of the things I tell families when we're pre-planning is let's take a photograph of the urn you selected or the casket you selected and put that with the plan, so that if the time comes many years down the road, your family has that guide for what you were thinking and what was meaningful for you. And don't be afraid to ask detailed questions, right? I've had lots of families ask me if they can come and tour the crematory, if certain cremation, if there are certain things about cremation, for example, that are meaningful to them. For example, a Catholic family who wants to make sure they understand the cremation process so that their ashes can be kept together as they are supposed to do, or that as they are guided to do. And I think most everyone on this call knows the difference between a revocable and an irrevocable contract, but I just want to talk about this a little bit. Every pre-plan should be revocable. Irrevocable should only be used if we're doing a Medicaid spend down. Once, a revocable, of course, you have control over that contract. Irrevocable, you lose control of the financial part of that contract. You can't ever get money back from it. So if you have a burial contract and it is made irrevocable, and closer to the time of your passing, you decided that you changed your mind and you wanted to do cremation and you signed a self-authorization for cremation, we can certainly change that, but your family is not going to get back any extra money if there's a difference in the cost. And once a plan is made irrevocable, it cannot be undone. So it should be taken very seriously. I had one instance where it had been made irrevocable, I think by accident, and the family wanted to cancel, and we were able to go through an extensive process to get that changed back to revocable, but it may not always be able to be done. And I will share there was one instance that I did do an irrevocable contract that was not for Medicaid. This was an instance where someone, her religious convictions were very important to her, and she really wanted casketed burial. She did not want to be cremated. It was extremely important to her. But her children said, no matter what you tell us, we're going to have you cremated because we want the difference in the money. So we decided to make her plan irrevocable so that her children would not be able to change that at the time of her loss and get that money back. And then, when should the client sign? I mean, Yes, we want you to pre-plan, right? We want the client to have that plan and that protection in place. Yes, we want them to do that, but we want them to do it once they fully and completely understand everything in the plan. So we need to review a clear list of everything that is in the plan and make sure that all of those items are wanted. And I like to make sure there's clear language too, because if in the paperwork that we have, for example, there's something called prestige package, when that family gets home and they see that, they might not remember that that is the stationery, um, the funeral cards and the programs and the registry book and all of that that's part of the stationery package. So we write that out on the contract to make sure that they can see that. Make sure that they understand the agreement and that all of their questions have been clearly answered. Those questions that were on that other page, as well as any other questions that the client has. And that they fully understand their payments, any cost of insurance, what they're paying for that plan and what their options are. And absolutely not feel pressured or coerced to sign a contract. If you're driving down the road at the speed limit and someone comes up behind you and gets on your bumper trying to make you go faster by getting closer to you, you don't have to go faster if you don't feel safe going faster. And in fact, in that instance, you might not feel safe going the speed you were going anymore and want to slow down. It's absolutely your right to slow down and take time to think about that. Um, to take time to think about that. All right. So I wanted to leave lots of space for discussion because I can share things that I know with you, but I don't know the things that you want to learn about. So Sharon, can we look at the chat and see what we want to talk about from here?
Absolutely. Thank you, T. We do have a question from Diana that she says that she's been informed several funeral homes are not accepting prepaid cremations any longer due to the increasing funeral cost. And Diana is a guardian, and of course, they are encouraged to complete prepaid funeral arrangements. Do you know or have you heard of this happening significantly, maybe in the Central Florida area?
I have not heard of that at all. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, that there are some funeral homes that are not offering prepaid cremation plans, or that they're not honoring previously purchased ones.
Diane, well, it's not accepting prepaid cremations any longer. I don't know if that's in the planning stage or if that is after somebody has one, because it seems to me they would have to accept it. Not offering. Diana is saying not offering.
Not offering
Yeah.
prepaid. I have not heard that. Um, Again, I can only answer from the company that I work for. We do offer prepaid cremation, funeral cremation, cemetery, any plans at all.
And do you have a limit like on the amount of money? Because Diana's saying too that sometimes it's just when somebody has very limited funds, the $2,500 allotted, for a burial cremation that Medicaid allows for. Does that matter at all when you're doing the planning?
So every place is going to have their own prices, right? So that's where, you might need to shop around and, sometimes we're looking for price, sometimes we're looking for value, right? So
Mhm.
there are lots of different providers out there. They're offering different things. You need to find a provider that you trust to take you into care and work with your family. But also you need to find one that's going to be able to work with your budget.
Right, right. Okay, we have another question, and this is a good question, one that I actually wanted you to elaborate on a little bit too. If you could explain what happens when a burial cremation is prepaid and the company closes or files bankruptcy, in the state of Florida. What is the state's role? What happens?
Yeah. So the funeral home is required to protect the client's investment by backing it with a third party. So, for example, if you did a plan with Dignity Memorial and Dignity Memorial went out of business, your plan is held by the insurance company, so your money is there. If it's just one location that closes that's part of the same company, then the company will honor your plan at another location. But if the whole company goes out of business, your money is protected in that insurance policy.
Okay, so even if you don't have like a real policy and you just do a lump sum, you're still protected under the state. Do you go to the state of Florida too, or another funeral home, and they would be able to help you?
Yeah, so when you make a plan, you lock in your prices, right? So you're protected from inflation, so those prices never go up. If your plan is able to transfer within the same company, then those locked in prices are going to be honored. If you're for some reason having to use a different company, your money is protected, the amount that you invested is protected. But when you transfer to another company, they don't have to honor the locked in prices that were made by a different company. Does that make sense?
Oh, but yes, that does. That's very interesting. Okay. All right, we have a question from Alish O'Connor. How do you feel about direct cremation places?
I mean, it is everyone's personal choice how they choose to do their final arrangements, right? Is a very personal selection. I think whether it is a direct cremation service or a full service funeral home, it is up to the client, the family, to look into that place and make sure that it is something that they feel comfortable with, and is going to meet their needs.
Okay. Deborah wants to know when making prepaid arrangements for a um, durable power of attorney client, so your agent under power of attorney, please discuss the need to check the box that allows the DPOA to receive the remains and the death certificates. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, so the power of attorney ends at the time of loss.
Right.
So the power of attorney does not give you the ability to pick up cremated remains or to make decisions and final arrangements. That always goes to next of kin. But there's, certainly if you are the personal representative of the person, then that will fall to you.
Okay. So powers of attorneys have really no rights once, with the funeral home and once
Yeah.
the individual passes away.
Yeah, that there may be complexities there that are a little outside of my
Yeah,
lane,
right.
that I'm not aware of, but it is always the next of kin that handles the arrangements or the personal representative if designated. I will say that if a person wants someone other than their next of kin to handle final arrangements, I always tell them they need to talk to an attorney, and get something written up that's outside of the will, whether that's, some people call it a control of disposition form or death care surrogate form, but just to make sure that there's documentation for the funeral home to use to allow that person to be able to make decisions in place of a next of kin.
That's kind of interesting, and we might be able to open it up to comments, but with the guardians, I mean, I'm not a guardian, professional guardian, but they're making the pre-arrangements, and very often these their wards do not have next of kin. So can a professional guardian, is there any problem with a professional guardian receiving, death certificates or being able to work with a funeral home?
Yeah, that's something that I would probably need to ask someone else about to make sure that I'm giving you good information. But I'm sure that there is no problem if you are the personal representative of that person and you're handling their affairs, that would flow smoothly. And the funeral home is going to make sure that everything flows smoothly.
Okay. All righty. So I have a little, very short story comment. When I had a trust client many years ago, um, she was in independent living in a community, but then I think she transferred over to like the healthcare side of the nursing home, etc. Anyway, she passed away, and the facility took her or called the wrong funeral home to pick up her body. And I guess it was because she had made new arrangements and had not let anybody know, especially so I always kind of think of that. And I think if I was, helping somebody, I would make sure that wherever they are, as they age and everything, if they're in a facility or something, that you make sure if anything happens to them, they know what to do with the body,
Right.
I mean, so that was just something that was very eye-opening for me. Well, this is something we all need to definitely think about, not only for our clients, but for ourselves. I know as being in the estate planning business, kind of with the trusts and all, you're always telling people, make sure everything's up to date, but think about yourself too. Do you have your own personal plans and documents done and up to date? So, okay, Richard has a question. Can you discuss short form versus long form death certificates and who may request a long form? As a guardian, I have been told that I cannot request a long form.
Well, the difference between the short form and the long form is that the long form has the cause of death and the short form does not. So the long form, that is the cause of death is considered part of the medical records and is protected by HIPAA laws. So the only person who can pick up the death certificates is the one that is designated to do that.
And there's really not a need for, there are certain instances where a long form is needed, if I remember right. Is that like for insurance policies?
Yeah, you're going to need a mix of both of them. So some places are going to require the long form for, like you said, like life insurance. But there are other things like banks where they cannot accept the long form because of the HIPAA privacy laws.
Right, right. Teresa's saying personal injury, estate, life
So,
insurance. Yeah. So, Kate and Julie, is it possible to open up the or unrestrict the audio?
Yeah,
I
I can. We just, before
Teresa
we kick
Barton
in
wanted to make a few
privacy for
comments.
making sure that no one else speaks over anybody, but I can take it off. So
Okay, if
Teresa,
you
you should be
take it
able
off,
to.
There we go.
I'm going to let Teresa Barton speak.
Can you guys
first.
hear me?
Yes.
Yay. Okay. Hey, T, thanks so much for being here. Two things I want to talk about. This is something just for old guardians versus new. So just for information, 744.441, which is the Florida statute that we used to be limited to around $10,000 for burial. It was a huge problem. We couldn't, because T, you may not know, as a guardian, we have to petition the courts to get approval to sign the contract and to pay for any part of the funeral, whether it's cremation or funeral or contract with anything. We have to get court ordered to do that. And so I'm just bringing this to everyone's attention because I don't know when this changed. I was trying to find it out. I don't know what date that changed. I thought we were still under that same restriction, but 744.441 has now been amended and there's no dollar amount limit, which is great because there was a big problem with that. $10,000 has not paid for a full burial in a long time. And if you're talking about one where they're flying back to New York, it didn't. So that was the first piece of information. The second piece is T and I met yesterday by accident at a event, and I started telling her the problem that many of us guardians have of not realizing when we got started that if we have ashes at our office, that someone's going to eventually want them. And we've now learned many years into our occupation that nobody wants them, and no easy place to put them, no easy disposition. And I've always had a personal problem with, even if I could get a place to agree to take them, there wouldn't be a memorial, even a little brass label with their name, and there wouldn't be public record for someone doing like ancestry, for example. So I asked T to look into it. She and I are going to talk about it again. We've been trying to find cemeteries or places or a way where we could have maybe a professional guardian plot and maybe a sand thing and then a little thing with granite where we could pay for just the brass name. But of course, this is a cost problem because most of these guardianships have been, in my case, discharged for decades, and there's no money there other than me paying for it personally. And if it was one or two, that would be maybe tolerable, but I think I have 9, I believe. So I'm just bringing that up to everyone's attention. If you have that problem, this has been one of my soapboxes for about 15 years. So I've been trying to find a solution, still trying to find it. And then T, back to your understanding, if you don't do a lot of work with guardians, they struggle sometimes with getting the courts to authorize the petition fast enough, especially if it's a close to need situation. So I just wanted you to be aware of our process. It's different than most families that you'll deal with, and we're super constricted by the courts. So whenever you're working with a guardian, understand that their attorney has to prepare a petition. The petition has to be filed with the court. The courts have to give them a court order. And sometimes in our court system, it's not always like it should be. And so just so you're aware, that's one of our big hurdles. So I'm always suggesting to guardians in the mentor group, just get it started. My goal is I always get the funeral arrangements started by the time I file my initial inventory and my first guardianship report. That's like 90 days in. That's my goal on every case. But I've had clients pass away before that 90 days hits, which is a big problem for us in guardianship because many courts take the position we don't have access to money once the death of the ward happens. And it's a big problem because there's no PR, there's no will, there's no money, there's no estate to happen. Who's going to pay for, at a minimum, a direct cremation, as well as who's got the authority to sign? It's a big problem. So guardianship, we always want to try to get the funeral stuff done in advance, because if we can get the next of kin or persons of interest signing off and consenting to the petition that gets filed with the courts, that gets us the court order to pay for the funeral arrangements, much of the drama goes away. But if they die before that happens, it can be a really big mess. So just so you're aware of how that works in our world.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. All right. That's all I want to say, Sharon.
Are there any other questions? We still have a couple minutes.
Thank you so much for your comments, Teresa, and to everyone on the call today. We'll just wait just a little bit more, and if anybody has any further questions, we will be happy to answer those. And you've got T's information there. So next month, on the second Wednesday of the month, which is February 12th, we will have our next AGID webinar. And we're going to have an individual that is very familiar with and skilled in talking about the Medicaid long-term care participant directed option. This has to do with when someone is on the waiver program, and it has to do with providing care and who can be the caregivers and all of that kind of stuff. So this is a big, it's been around, but the government is really trying to get the word out about how that works, because it does give more options for individuals that are on the waiver program. So I hope that you will tune in and sign up for our aged webinar on February 12th when you get the invitation out for that. So again, this presentation will be posted to our aged website under our webinar tab, and you'll be look for an email from Kate within the next week regarding your continuing education credits. T, thank you so much for your insights today and your knowledge. We really appreciate your speaking to our group today. With that, I will say Happy New Year to everyone. Make it a good day.